Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought, a podcast where we dig into the data and dynamics shaping the automotive industry, what's changing, why it matters, and what leaders should do next. Here's the headline. Nearly half of all households returning to markets are switching brands, a sharp jump from pre-pandemic norms. At the same time, monthly payments are pushing $800 on average, with a growing share of consumers paying $1,000 or more. Put these together, and you get a market where affordability pressure is upending traditional brand loyalty and then opening up the door to new conquest opportunities. Joining me today is Tom Libby, Director, Loyalty Solutions and Industry Analysis at S&P Global Mobility. We'll cover what these loyalty numbers mean and where the conquest opportunities are emerging. Tom, welcome. Let me get started with asking you a few questions. Do you see defection rates that are now approaching 50%? What's the biggest factor driving that shift right now?
Thanks, Guido. There's several influences on that trend. One of the major ones is that we now have three fuel types or propulsion systems that all have significant market share, and we frankly have not had that before, if ever. So now the consumer has a choice of acquiring an electric vehicle, a hybrid vehicle, or an internal combustion engine vehicle. And that is creating many more choices than there ever existed before. And we're seeing consumers take advantage of that and move among those three. The other item I would mention that definitely comes into play here is the overall turmoil we're seeing in the industry that goes beyond the fuel type choices. We've seen tariffs come in last spring and summer. We've seen, and frankly, they're going on, they're going off. It creates confusion. We're seeing various influences on pricing that you mentioned in the introduction. So frankly, there's more turmoil now within the industry and also influencing the industry from outside. And those are creating uncertainty for the consumer, and they're creating the options for the consumer to consider powertrains and models and brands they've never considered before. I would add on one other item, which is that we have, in addition to Tesla, which is not really that new, we have 5 brands that we put in the category of disruptors. And they are quite new brands, and all but one are electric only, but they are creating more choices for the consumer. So we put all these things together, and you're seeing a lower loyalty and a higher defection rate than we've seen for quite a while.
Let me latch on to that second topic that you mentioned, pricing. How has the rise in monthly payments changed the way consumers evaluate brands and vehicles?
Well, as I mentioned, there's much, much more choice. And so the consumer who owns a vehicle where they were paying on a loan monthly payment of, say, $550 a month, they come back to the dealership or they go online. They want to get the same vehicle again because they're very satisfied with it. And they notice that the monthly payment now is going to be $750 a month. And frankly, they're shocked. And so those increases we're seeing are causing consumers to look around and see if they can find another brand, another model that is closer to what they were paying before. So it's simply the increases, frankly, dramatic increases in monthly payment and also in the mix of loans. We're seeing loans now much, much longer term length. That's causing customers to look around more than they did before. And I would say that's the main reason.
If we elaborate on that topic a little bit more, Tom, would you say that consumers are going beyond switching brands and also moving across segments to manage cost?
That's a great question. And we are seeing that. And it's interesting. One of the metrics that we track at S&P Global Mobility in the loyalty practice is segment loyalty. And there's about 36 segments in the US industry, about 15 in the luxury market, about 21 in the mainstream part of the market. And believe it or not, the loyalty to the segment, in other words, the percentage of households when they return to market that remain in the same segment is only about 37%, which means that almost 2/3 of the households, when they return to market, they're switching segments, and only 1/3 are staying in the same segment. So there's a lot of reasons for this, and certainly pricing plays a significant role. So a customer who comes back, as I mentioned previously, and finds their monthly payment has gone up dramatically, they will look for a monthly payment similar to what the vehicle in the garage is. And that may mean changing segment. It may mean going from a luxury brand to a mainstream brand, which automatically requires changing segment. They also may decide that they don't need a three-row SUV anymore, that a two-row is fine. That requires changing in segment. And so a lot of these changes, yes, they are across segments. So we are seeing a lot of movement across segments. And also, frankly, we're seeing movement between the luxury category overall and the mainstream category. And I can tell you from our data, we're seeing that about 28% of luxury households that come back to market. When I say luxury household, I'm referring to a household that has a luxury branded vehicle in the garage. About 28% of those, when they return to market, they actually move to a mainstream brand and segment. So they're quote unquote moving down, if you will. And the reverse, going from a mainstream category or brand up to luxury, is only about 9%. So this says that in general, the movement from luxury to mainstream is 3 times the movement the other way. But nevertheless, whether they move up or they move down, yes, we're seeing a lot of movement across segments. And certainly a significant part of this is because of the affordability issue and the increased price for new vehicles. Yes.
Let's elaborate a little bit more on manufacturer loyalty, which you just addressed. Between premium and volume brands, manufacturer loyalty ranges from roughly about 37% to 66%. What creates those differentiations between the brands on either end of the spectrum?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yes, that gap from approximately 37 to 67, 68, I mean, that is huge. Bear in mind that the entire loyalty range from the very bottom to the very top is only about, 60, 70 points. So we have some manufacturers that are able to retain their customers within the manufacturer at a much higher rate than others. What is causing this? Well, first of all, we need to bear in mind that there's some manufacturers that only have one brand. So if a customer, for a variety of reasons, decides to switch brand, they have to leave that manufacturer. But there are several manufacturers, I'm thinking of GM, Stellantis, some others that have a wide variety of brands. And I will say that some of those with a wide choice of brands are better at being able to keep their households and they return to market inside the corporation. And basically what those corporations that have a very high manufacturer loyalty, what they've been able to do is they've been able to position their brand so they complement each other. So for instance, you might have one brand that offers trucks only. You might have another brand that offers cars only, so that if a brand, or crossovers only, but no pickups, so that if hypothetically a household in a brand that wants to get a pickup, they go back to the dealer, sorry, we don't have any pickups. That household can find pickups at another brand within the same manufacturer. So that contributes to manufacturer loyalty, even though the household is switching from one brand to another. So that landscape I just described creates high manufacturer loyalty. In contrast, there's some manufacturers that where they have several brands, but the brands are really, frankly, there isn't strong movement between them for a variety of reasons. So those brands, when they come back to market, they end up leaving the corporation. So a lot of it is being able to position your other brands so that they provide a reasonable alternative to households returning to market. And again, we've seen some manufacturers that are very, very good at doing that.
Let's talk about those brands with lower loyalty. What should they focus on first to reduce those defection rates?
Well, an important part of loyalty is the breadth of the range that's offered to the consumer who's returning to market. It's really intuitive if you think about it. The wider the offerings that a brand offers, everything else being equal, it's more probable that the household will be able to find what they want at that brand. So we find almost without exception that brands that have a wide portfolio of products which to choose, covering all the price points, covering all the body styles, covering all the sizes. In general, everything else being equal, they will have a higher probability and they will do a better job of keeping their households within the brand when they return to market. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Within the luxury sector, Mercedes, Lexus, and BMW in general have a wider portfolio than the other luxury brands. And so again, they in general do have higher brand loyalty because the customer returning to market, if they're going up in size, if they're going up in price, if they're changing body style, in general, they can find what they want within the brand they already have at a greater degree, a higher degree than a brand at the other end. And there are some brands that, I mean, it's just their decision and that's fine. There are luxury brands and there are mainstream brands that have quite narrow portfolios. They may only offer one or two products frankly, it's very difficult for them to keep the household because the household returns to market. They want to get the same brand, but they may want to switch body styles. They may want to go down in price. They may want to get a smaller, bigger vehicle. It's going to be harder for them to find what they want at that brand they already have. So there's going to be a higher probability they will switch brands. So a lot of it is related to the portfolio. So I would say for a brand that has a relatively small portfolio, that, by the way, that might very well be the mission. That might be the goal, or that might be the overall positioning that that brand wants. They may be content that, frankly, that brand's approach or their overall marketing message may be that they like exclusivity. They're trying to create an image of exclusivity, and that really comes with having a small number of models. Again, if that's what their goal is, that's what their positioning is, that's what their market message is, fine, that's terrific. Then they should stay that way. But when they have that portfolio that's relatively small, they just need to be aware that a ramification of that is that their loyalty will not, unless they add products, reach the loyalty levels of a brand that has a much, much wider portfolio. So a lot of it is frankly just related to the overall marketing goal or positioning of the brand and what they want to be long term.
Let's shift gears a little bit here, Tom. And your report highlighted credit score as being a key variable. Why would some brands see higher loyalty among lower credit households?
Well, that's a good question. I would just say that, remember, there are households that are buying on different metrics, and one of the metrics is price and monthly payment. And frankly, some of the brands are value oriented, and they very deliberately target those lower ends. That's their market, that's their price positioning of their products, and that's what they do. And so you will find a tier of the public that when they buy only based on monthly payment, only on price, there are brands that appeal to those customers and reach out to those customers, want them, because that is the overall mission of that brand. So that's really part of the industry. And although we may not talk about it that much, that is a reality, is that there are brands that target those customers. And once those brands have those customers in the fold, in the family, they will then do whatever they can to keep them. Knowing that those households are finance oriented, are monthly payment oriented, they will have incentives to keep them, the loyalty incentives to keep them. They will focus on monthly payment. They will focus on value for the money. That whole value for the money proposition, it's a big part of the industry, and there are brands that focus on that and succeed in that. So I think that contributes to higher loyalty, brand loyalty for that lower end of the market.
Expanding further on that topic, should OEMs rethink incentive strategies across credit tiers, specifically APR offers versus cash incentives?
Yes, I think that OEMs, manufacturers, frankly, are spending a huge amount of money on incentives, and whether it's to keep a household in the fold or to attract a owner of a competitive brand. The numbers are in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s billions of dollars that the manufacturers spend annually to appeal to customers. So frequently the approaches that the manufacturers use are candidly not the most efficient. They will frequently use national incentive programs that reach out to everybody. And a better way, a more efficient way for a manufacturer to spend its dollars, its marketing dollars, is to target a specific part of the market that the manufacturer has reason to believe is open to leaving, is open to being conquested. And the credit score is a category, is a good example of that. There is a range of brand loyalty across the credit scores, as you mentioned a minute ago. And so a manufacturer who just reaches out to all customers regardless of credit score, frankly, is wasting some money, because there are some tiers of credit scores where the customers are very loyal. They are not going to leave. So a manufacturer who develops a conquest campaign is going to want to use those monies as efficiently as possible and reach out to the households that are most open to leaving. In other words, the least loyal, and we call them the least sticky, if you will. And there are ways of identifying, as we talked about a minute ago with credit score, there are ways of identifying those cohorts of households that are most open to leaving, the least sticky. And S&P Global Mobility has terrific data isolating and identifying those cohorts who are the least loyal. And we are, on an ongoing basis, we are reaching out to our clients and making them aware of these possibilities for using their marketing dollars as efficiently as possible, and not reaching out to those customers where there is almost no chance they will defect.
Great insights. Let's pedal backwards a little bit and talk about EVs. EV buyers in some regions are more loyal to the powertrain than the brand. How should that inform the OEM on what their conquest strategy should look like?
Yes, well, this is in some ways related to what we just talked about, but yes, there are some parts of the United States where the households, and we have hard data that shows this without a doubt. There's some parts of the United States where the customers are very committed to electric vehicles. By that, I mean, if you look at data, we show electric vehicle loyalty to stay, the propensity to stay with the same fuel type as being very, very high. There's some parts of the United States where loyalty to EVs, to electric vehicles, to just the concept of an electric vehicle is in the 80% range, which is very high. It's almost off the charts. But at any rate, and we've actually found that in those same areas where those customers are devoted to electric vehicles, their devotion to the brand is actually significantly less than that. Well, that creates an opportunity. So you have these households, they're definitely going to get another electric vehicle, but they're not definitely going to get the same brand. Well, this opens an opportunity for another brand that is trying to conquest households to its electric vehicle. Might be a brand that's just come out with an electric vehicle, might be a brand that wants to continue in the market with an electric vehicle, but they know they need to conquest. That brand knows they can reach out to that area of the country where households love their EVs. So they're going to get another EV, but they're less devoted to the brand. That gap, we call it, that creates an opportunity for a brand with an EV to go in there and reach out to those households. And that creates a better opportunity for that conquesting brand than going to an area of the country where that gap does not exist. And there are parts of the country definitely where the devotion or the appeal of EVs is similar quantitatively to the devotion to the brand. Well, it doesn't make much sense for a new brand to reach out there because they like the EV at about the same degree as the brand. You want to reach out to that other area I mentioned a minute ago. So this is another example of where a manufacturer or a brand can use their dollars efficiently, knowing that quantitatively there's a much, much higher chance they're going to succeed in that one area than the other area, geographically speaking.
If we elaborate on this a little more, Tom, and let's think about conquest here. What would be the biggest opportunity if we were to target hybrid owners who may be considering EVs?
Well, you're going to want to look at an area of the United States, a DMA or a state where the adoption is strong, that has EV loyalty, but also EV adoption is strong. And then you're going to also want to look at an area of the country, whether it's a DMA or state, where there are a lot of hybrid owners and where there is movement from hybrid to EV. In other words, using our data, which can not only show static data, but can also show movement from A to B, you're going to want to reach out to those areas in the United States where there are a lot of hybrid owners, but also we see a significant movement from hybrid to EV. You're going to want to avoid those areas of the country where we do not see that movement and where we do not see hybrid adoption being strong. So you're going to want to look at two things. You're going to see where hybrid adoption is strong and where hybrid movement to EVs is also strong. And we can identify specific parts of the country that fit those definitions. That's where a manufacturer would want to focus their conquesting efforts.
If we focus on trim level loyalty, the data indicates that variation can exceed 15 points. How can teams practically activate on that level of granularity?
Yes, and this is another terrific example of how to use our data to market efficiently and get the most out of your dollars spent. And this is perhaps not that well known, but if you look across the trim levels within a model, the loyalty varies. The loyalty to the model, also the loyalty to the brand, varies significantly, as you mentioned. Again, this is something that is not that widely known, but brand that wants to do a conquest campaign, they're going to want to, if they're reaching out to certain models, they're going to want to know which trim levels of that model are loyal and which are not. They're going to want to avoid the ones that are very, very loyal. And again, there's a wide range. So it's a similar concept where the brand wanting to adopt the conquesting campaign is going to want to identify which households have those trim levels that are low loyalty and which have the trim levels that are high loyalty and avoid the ones with the high loyalty. And I know this is, I don't want to make a pitch, but just to be candid, we have data going all the way down to the trim level and the fuel type. So you can combine those two and identify those households that have a low loyalty to the brand or the model based on their trim level. And also you can look at fuel type, put all that together, and you're really zeroing in on the household with the greatest opportunity to be conquested. And you don't want to waste your dollars on those households that are of a trim level that where we know they're going to stick. They're going to stay with that model or that brand. And by the way, these data, they vary across the models, across the brands. And therefore, it's very, very important to look at the specific data at the trim level for your model and determine what is the range and what are we going to do here, and not conclude that it's the same across all models, because it's not.
If there were one immediate action item for OEMs or dealers to take based on this analysis, what would it be?
Well, first of all, I would say before the action item to just be aware of today's landscape and what you mentioned at the top, which is that today's landscape is different than it was pre-pandemic in 2018, 2019. As you mentioned, almost half of the households that return to market now are switching brands. And this is not from a survey. This is actual registration data that we have that shows the registration is changing from A to B within a house. So that first step is to just be aware of it. And the second step would be to use that data to the maximum advantage for your OEM or brand. And by that, I mean, you want to know that there are many, many households that are going to be moving. So you want to take this as an opportunity to reach out and to conquest other households, because you know that a lot of them are moving. So take this as an opportunity to gain additional owners from other brands. The other side of the coin is that you want to do everything you can to keep your households. They are crucially important for you. The manufacturer or the brand spent a huge amount of dollars getting those households into the brand in the first place. The last thing you want to do, so you want to reach out with loyalty incentives. You have your owners and you know what they're driving and you know what the price positioning is in the marketplace. So you want to develop loyalty incentives that will be effective in keeping those households in the brand. So it's a double-edged sword, if you will, but there are actions that you can take on both sides of the coin to maximize your results given today's environment.
If you were to blow the horn one more time on our loyalty service, Tom, the pricing team specifically, how could they use our loyalty metrics as a signal of value perception? And where should they hold price versus introducing incentives?
Yes. So the loyalty data we have, they are frequently used, and frankly, most of the time are used to point out who has high brand loyalty, who has high manufacturer loyalty, who has high model loyalty, so on and so forth. And obviously, those are very, very important. And we recognize, and the leaders should be recognized for doing a terrific job of keeping their households in the fold. But what's not talked about that much, which we also have similarly very robust, thorough data on, is where loyalty is low. Whether it's low for the manufacturer, for the brand, for the segment, for the fuel type, et cetera. That data is also very, very valuable because it can be used to develop conquest campaigns. Basically, the marketing teams, whether it's at the manufacturer, the brand level, or even at the dealer level, you're going to want to reach out and find those holes, if you will, those areas where loyalty is low, whether it be at a trim level, whether it be at a monthly payment level, whether it be at a fuel type level. You want to find those areas of opportunity with low loyalty and then reach out to those. So that is the way a manufacturer brand can use their dollars most efficiently and get the greatest bang for the buck, to be candid.
It's always a pleasure having you, Tom. Thank you for breaking down how shifting affordability is reshaping loyalty across the automotive market. The takeaway here is clear. Brand loyalty is softening, payment sensitivity is rising, and buyers are becoming more fluid across brands, segments, powertrains, you name it. At the same time, the opportunity is growing for teams that can act on a more precise data insight, from credit tiers to trim level dynamics to local inventory conditions. For listeners who want to explore the data, key trends, and strategic implications in more detail, please be sure to check out the full analysis. Thank you for tuning in to this month of Fuel for Thought. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and explore our latest automotive insights. We'll be back for another episode shortly.